You've been scrolling listings for weeks now, 30-year-old sailboats, prices that finally look possible on your budget, and a quiet voice in your head asking if you're about to buy a dream or a floating disaster. Here's the truth. I paid for the hard way. 5 sailboats built in the 1980s are still worth every dollar in 2026, and most of the shiny newer boats sitting right next to them at the dock are worth far less than the seller is asking. I learned that standing in a boatyard in Rhode Island, watching a surveyor tap my very first mistake with a little steel hammer. Stay with me, because one of these 5 boats hides a run of hull numbers that turn thousands of hopeful buyers into blister victims. I'll show you the exact number that separates a genuine bargain from a nightmare straight out of the builder's own production records. Let me start with the thing nobody selling you a boat wants you to understand. An old sailboat can be a better boat than a new one. Not cheaper, better. When I first went shopping, I believed what every first-timer believes. I thought newer meant safer, stronger, more reliable. So I looked down my nose at anything with a 1980s hull. I figured those old boats were tired, brittle, one storm away from the bottom. I was completely wrong, and here is why. In the late 1970s and through the 1980s, most quality builders were still laying up hulls by hand with solid fiberglass below the waterline, no coring in the underbody, no cost-cutting sandwich construction where the water gets in, just thick, hand-laid glass, sometimes an inch or more at the keel. Builders back then didn't fully trust the material yet, so they overbuilt everything. They used too much resin, too much cloth, too much bronze and stainless. That over-engineering is exactly why those hulls are still floating 40 years later. Take the Pacific Seacraft 37. That boat was drawn by a naval architect named William Crelock, and it was built in Fullerton, California. It is a canoe stern cutter with a hand-laid solid glass hull, bronze seacocks, and an interior of teak joinery that no builder today could afford to reproduce. A new boat with that build quality would cost you north of $500,000. You can find a 1980s Pacific Seacraft 37 today for somewhere between $80,000 and $130,000, depending on condition and gear. Now here's the part that stops people cold. That 37-year-old boat has often appreciated. It's worth more today than it sold for new. Try finding a newer production boat that can say that. But, and this is where I have to be honest with you, solid glass and good bones don't make a boat cheap to own. They make it worth restoring. Those are two very different things, and the gap between them is where I lost the first chunk of my savings. Because a great old hull can sit under a rig that's about to fail, an engine that's about to die, and a set of systems that will bleed you dry one invoice at a time. Which brings me to a boat that taught me what real overbuilding looks like. The Cape Dory. Cape Dory built boats in Taunton, Massachusetts, and their designs came from a man named Carl Alberg. Alberg was a Swedish trained draftsman who worked for the Coast Guard and drew boats the old way, narrow, deep, full-keeled, with long overhangs and heavy displacement. His boats are not fast. Let me say that plainly. If you want to win a race to the anchorage, buy something else. But an Alberg-designed Cape Dory will take a beating from the ocean and keep you alive, and that is a different kind of value. The Cape Dory 30 and 33 are the ones I'd point you toward. Solid hand-laid hulls, bronze hardware, encapsulated lead ballast, so there are no keel bolts to rot out from under you. That last detail matters more than most buyers realize. On many boats, the keel is bolted on, and those bolts corrode where you can't see them. On a full-keel Cape Dory, the ballast is sealed inside the fiberglass. One entire category of terrifying, expensive failure simply doesn't exist on that boat. You can find a clean Cape Dory 30 today for somewhere between $18,000 and $35,000. That is real ocean-capable sailing for the price of a used pickup truck. So why isn't everyone buying them? Here's the first crack in the story. Somebody makes money every time a first-time buyer walks past a solid old boat and reaches for something newer and worse. Somebody profited from you believing that older automatically means riskier. And it took me 2 boats and a lot of wasted money to figure out who. Let me show you how that machine actually works, because it starts with a number nobody says out loud. When you buy a used cruising sailboat, the purchase price is the smallest check you will write. I need you to sit with that. The sticker is the down payment on a relationship, and the relationship has a monthly appetite. Here's what almost no listing tells you, and no broker volunteers. The standing rigging, the wire that holds the mast up, has a lifespan. Insurance underwriters and riggers generally want it replaced every 10 to 15 years, or every 40 to 50,000 the ocean miles, whichever comes first. On a boat from the 1980s, unless you can prove it was redone recently, assume the rig is original and assume it's overdue. Re-rigging a 37-foot cruiser runs you somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 if you keep the mast standing, and more if the mast has to come down and get inspected. I have watched that number climb past $10,000 when the rigger found corroded chain plates hiding behind the interior joinery. Now let me tell you about the boat that showed me these numbers in the flesh. The Tayana 37. The Tayana 37 was drawn by Robert Perry, one of the most respected cruising designers alive, and it was built in Taiwan by the Taiyang Yard. They built more than 600 of them, which makes it one of the most successful blue water cruisers ever produced. It's a heavy displacement double-ended cutter with a solid glass hull and enough teak on deck to build a small cabin. People have sailed these boats around the world, plural, meaning the same hull has crossed oceans for decades. You can buy a Tayana 37 today for anywhere between $50,000 and $90,000. On paper, it's one of the great bargains in cruising, but the Tayana is also the perfect example of how a cheap purchase price hides an expensive truth. That teak deck I mentioned? Gorgeous in photos. On a 40-year-old boat, it's often a slow leak factory. The teak is screwed down through the deck, and every one of those thousands of screw holes is a potential path for water into the core and the plywood below. Rebedding or removing a leaking teak deck is not a weekend job. Owners on the cruising forums have reported spending $15,000 to $25,000 to strip a teak deck and properly seal what's underneath. That's on a boat that costs $60,000. Then there's the engine. Most of these boats came with small diesels, Yanmars, Perkins, Volvos, and a diesel that's been sitting and lightly used for 40 years is on borrowed time. A full repower, meaning a new engine dropped in with new mounts, new exhaust, new wiring, will cost you between $15,000 and $25,000 and more if the old engine has to come out through the cabin. Add it up, a $60,000 boat that needs a rig, a deck, and an engine can quietly become a $110,000 boat. And nobody told you, because the person selling you the dream only gets paid when you focus on the sticker. So the question becomes brutal and simple. How do you tell the boat that's worth saving from the one that will drain your retirement? Because that difference is everything, and I'm going to give you the tools to see it. Now, I need to talk directly to some of you, because I know a chunk of you watching this already own one of these boats. You already signed. You already handed over the check, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a cold little worry has been sitting there ever since, whispering that maybe you bought wrong. If that's you, do not click away, because this next part is built specifically for you, and you can do it this weekend without paying a single broker or surveyor a dime. Here is the test that would have saved me from my worst mistake. Go down to your boat with a plastic coin, a bright flashlight, and a hard plastic tool handle. Below the waterline, if she's hauled out, tap along the hull in a grid, solid glass rings sharp and bright, like tapping a dinner plate. Wet or delaminated glass goes dull and flat, like tapping cardboard. Mark every dull spot with tape, then go inside and open every locker, lift every floorboard, and press hard on the plywood where the bulkheads meet the hull. If it's soft, if it flexes, if it smells like a wet basement, you've found water intrusion, and that is the single most important thing to know about your own boat. Now check your chain plates. These are the metal straps that anchor your shrouds to the hull, and on 80s boats they're often stainless steel buried inside the cabin liner where you can't see them. Follow each one down as far as you can. Look for rust streaks, brown weeping stains, or cracked sealant at the deck. Stainless steel suffers something called crevice corrosion. It rots from the inside, in the dark, where there's no oxygen, and it looks perfect right up until it lets go with the mast under full load. Owners have pulled chain plates that looked flawless on the surface and found them cracked halfway through underneath. If you find problems, you are not doomed. You are informed, and informed is the whole game. Every one of these issues has a known price, and knowing the price before it surprises you is the difference between a project and a catastrophe. The people who lose their savings are the ones who found out from an invoice instead of a flashlight. And that word savings brings me to the fourth boat, and to the real reason so many good people get hurt buying these old cruisers. Not everyone shopping for an 80s sailboat has $90,000. A lot of you are working with 20, 30, 40,000, and you've been told that at that price you can only buy junk. That's a lie, and the boat that proves it is the Catalina 30. If you want to go deeper on exactly what that overbuilding looks like in practice and how to use it to your advantage when you're standing in front of a boat with a checkbook in your hand, I put everything I know into a book called True Cost. It walks through the real numbers behind old sailboat ownership, what things actually cost to fix, what's worth restoring, and what to walk away from before you ever shake a broker's hand. You can find it linked in the description below. Now back to the boats themselves, because the Pacific Seacraft 37 is just the beginning of what that era of building produced. Frank Butler built Catalinas in California, and he built them by the thousands. The Catalina 30 is one of the most produced cruising sailboats in American history, with well over 6,000 hulls built. Now, a lot of the salty crowd sneers at Catalinas. They call them coastal boats, marina queens, not real blue water cruisers. And it's true, a Catalina 30 is not a Cape Dory. It's lighter, it's more of a coastal and lake cruiser, and I would think hard before taking one across an ocean. But here's what that snobbery hides from you. Because 6,000 of them exist, parts are everywhere, the community is enormous, and every single problem that boat can have has already been diagnosed, documented, and priced out by somebody online. You will never be alone with a mystery on a Catalina 30. You can buy a solid one for between $12,000 and $25,000, learn to sail, spend 3 seasons on the water, and sell it for close to what you paid because the demand never dies. As a first boat, as a way to find out if you even like this life before you bet your whole nest egg, it is one of the smartest buys on the water. The one thing you must check on a Catalina 30 is the keel. The bolted-on keel can develop what owners call the Catalina smile, a crack along the joint where the keel meets the hull, from the keel sagging on its bolts over decades. It's usually fixable, but you want to know before you buy, and it should be a bargaining chip, not a surprise. So now, you've got 5 real boats. The Pacific Seacraft 37 and the Cape Dory for bulletproof ocean quality. The Tayana 37 for serious blue water value, if you go in with your eyes open, and the Catalina 30 to get you on the water without gambling your retirement. But I promised you 5, and I've been holding the most important one back on purpose. Because the 5th boat is the best of all of them, and it also carries the single most dangerous trap in this entire video. This is the boat that separates buyers who did their homework from buyers who got destroyed, and the difference comes down to a number. The 5th boat is the Valiant 40. Robert Perry designed the Valiant 40, the same man who drew the Tayana. Many sailors consider it the boat that launched the entire modern performance cruising movement. It was faster than the heavy double-enders, but still tough enough to cross any ocean on Earth. A Valiant 40 named the same design has circumnavigated more than once. When people talk about the perfect all-around blue water boat under a manageable size, this is the hull they name. You can find one today for between $55,000 and $100,000, and for what that boat can do, it is a staggering value. And yet, there is a run of Valiant 40s I would beg you never to buy without knowing exactly what you're looking at. Because for a stretch of production years, these boats developed a blistering problem so notorious it has its own reputation in the surveyor community. Here's the story nobody tells you until it's too late. The early Valiants were built in Washington State. Somewhere in the mid to late 1970s, the builders switched to a particular resin. A fire-retardant resin is the version most owners and surveyors cite for a run of hulls. And that resin did something ugly. Under the waterline, over years of immersion, it broke down and formed blisters. Not the little cosmetic blisters every old boat gets. Deep, weeping, structural blistering that in bad cases smelled of vinegar and went right into the laminate. Owners spent tens of thousands of dollars peeling, drying, and relaminating entire hull bottoms. Some boats were essentially written off. Now hear me carefully, because this is the whole point. Not every Valiant 40 has this problem. The blistering is tied to a specific window of hull numbers built with that bad resin. Boats built before that window are fine. Boats built after the builder fixed the problem and moved production are fine. It is one specific, identifiable run of hulls in the middle. Two identical-looking Valiant 40s can sit side by side at a dock, and one is a $100,000 dream, while the other is a $40,000 bill wearing a boat costume. So, how do you tell them apart? How do you walk up to a Valiant 40 and know, in 60 seconds, whether it's a blister boat or a keeper? The listing won't tell you. The seller might not even know. The glossy photos hide it completely. This is the exact knife edge where I watched a friend nearly lose $30,000, and it is where the real secret of this whole video finally pays off. Here is the thing the industry buried under all that aspirational sailing lifestyle marketing, and it costs you nothing to use. Every fiberglass boat built in this country since 1972 carries a hull identification number. It's a 12-character code, and by federal rule, it's molded or stamped into the hull on the starboard side, up near the transom, above the waterline. Most buyers glance at it like it's a license plate and move on. That number is the single most powerful piece of research on the entire boat, and almost nobody knows how to read it. The last 4 characters tell you when the boat was actually built. There are 2 systems, and you need to know both. On boats built before August of 1984, the final characters encode the model year and the month of production. On boats built after that, the code changed slightly, but it still ends in the model year. Either way, buried in that stamp is the real birthday of the hull in front of you, not the model year the seller is advertising, the actual build date. And build date is everything, because the resin problems, the good years and the bad years, are all tied to when the hull was physically laid up. For the Valiant 40 specifically, the blister-era boats fall in an identifiable range of hull numbers, and enthusiasts and surveyors have documented it for decades on the owners' forums. The widely cited danger zone runs through roughly the first 249 hulls of the Washington production. That's the window most associated with the bad resin. Before I let anyone I care about put money on a Valiant, I have them do 3 things. Read the hull identification number off the transom with their own eyes, match the build date against the known blister years, and then, and only then, tap the bottom below the waterline the way I taught you earlier and listen for that dull, flat cardboard sound. Do you understand what this means? You don't need to be a surveyor. You don't need to trust the seller. You don't need to spend $1,000 to find out a boat is rotten. The truth was stamped into the hull at the factory 40 years ago by federal law, and it's sitting there in plain sight on every boat you look at. The industry built its entire sales pitch on you not knowing how to read 12 characters. One community of obsessive owners kept the records alive, matched the hull numbers to the failures, and posted it for free. And now you have it. That's the secret. It applies to all 5 of these boats and to every fiberglass boat you will ever consider. Before you fall in love with the teak and the sunset photos, you walk to the transom, you read the birth certificate the builder molded into the glass, and you check it against what actually went wrong in that year at that yard. A boat cannot lie about its hull identification number. Sellers can. Brokers can. Your own hopeful heart absolutely can. The number cannot. And here's the part that still makes me angry when I think about my first boat. The information was always there. The surveyors knew it, the old owners knew it, the forums had it written down, The only people who didn't know it were the first-time buyers, the ones with their savings on the table, because everything aimed at us was designed to sell a feeling, not a fact. Nobody stood between me and that boatyard hammer and said, "Read the numbers first." So I'm saying it to you now. Let me put a bow on the money, because this is what it all comes down to. Any of these 5 boats can be a brilliant buy. A Pacific Seacraft 37 or a Cape Dory with a documented recent rig and a dry hull. A Tayana 37 where somebody already did the teak deck and the repower, so you're buying the solution instead of the problem. A Catalina 30 to learn on and sell without losing your shirt. And a Valiant 40 from outside the blister years, which might be the finest all-around ocean boat you can buy for under $100,000. The boat isn't the risk. Your ignorance about that specific hull is the risk, and ignorance is the one thing you can fix for free before you ever write a check. I bought my first boat on emotion. On a beautiful day, on the way she looked against the water. I paid for that education with a survey full of surprises and a boatyard invoice that took my breath away. You don't have to. You get to walk down that dock knowing more than the person trying to sell to you, and there is no better feeling in this whole expensive, wonderful obsession than that. If you take one thing from me, let it be this. You were never the fool in this story. You were just the last person to be handed the numbers. Now you're not. You're the kind of buyer who reads the hull before he reads the listing, who checks the chainplates before he checks the sunset photos, who refuses to let anybody sell him a fantasy when there are hard facts stamped right into the fiberglass. So let me ask you something specific, and I actually want your answer. Which of these 5 would you put your money on: the bulletproof Cape Dory, the world-cruising Tayana, or the Valiant 40, if you could confirm it's outside those first 249 holes? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever walked away from a boat because of what you found at the transom or under the floorboards, tell me that story too. This audience learns from each other, so don't stay silent, type it out. And if you're the kind of person who would rather know the ugly truth up front than get ambushed by it later, then you belong here with the rest of us who refuse to be fooled by the sailing dream marketing machine. Subscribe and stand with the buyers who read the numbers first. Because next time, I'm going to show you the 3 most common diesel engines in these old cruisers, and which one of them can cost you $18,000 to replace when a $200 part would have saved it if you'd known what to listen for. You don't want to find that one out from an invoice either. Before you go, here's where this goes next. Inside the Honest Harbor, I finish what this video started, the full inspection walkthrough. I couldn't fit here. And you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, not some robot. First-time buyers like you are already in there with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time. Come join me. Now, finding a good old boat is only half the story. The next video shows you the honest way into a boatyard without draining your savings. It's starting right here, so stay with me.